Please welcome Director General of the International Air Transport Association, Willie Walsh, in discussion with Skift Airlines editor, Gordon Smith.
I didn't start that rumor, by the way. So.
You didn't start the rumor. I'll continue fueling it, Willie. Would you welcome Southwest?
Oh yeah, we have about 20% of our members are low cost, ultra low cost. So I think there is this impression that IATA is just the old legacy network carriers, but more and more. And in fact, in recent months, we've seen a lot of inquiries from low cost airlines outside of Europe and the US, principally in Asia, who are very interested in joining. So there's a lot of things that we can bring to carriers like that.
Why do you think low-cost carriers are hesitant to join IATA? Are you expensive? Are you not representing them?
I think you've got to look, one of the core reasons IATA existed was for the settlement program, settlement systems that we operate. So, hundreds of billions of dollars flow through IATA. When you buy a ticket from a travel agent, fly with the airline. So for a lot of new modeled airlines, this wasn't relevant to them. So they didn't really think about that. But we actually provide services on a commercial basis to a lot of low-cost airlines who aren't members. And I think what they're now realizing is that there would be an advantage for them to be part of IATA. And there are a lot of other services that we provide. So we're welcoming. We have 350 member airlines. It's increased significantly in the last number of years. And we represent about, when you look at those airlines, they provide about 82% of all commercial flying today.
We're going to get onto some big picture topics in a moment, but there's two stories that have been developing during the forum today, outside of these walls. Yeah. The first is a Wall Street Journal report that Spirit Airlines is preparing to file for bankruptcy protection. Your reaction to that news?
Well, I don't think that would come as a great surprise. There have been question marks about Spirit. Personally, I thought the DOJ was wrong to prevent the merger. I believe M&A consolidation in our industry is a positive. I think the consumer has benefited from consolidation because it now has an industry that's able to invest in products that, when you think back, 20 years ago, the state of the industry, the customer proposition was actually very poor. So I believe consolidation is a positive, and I think that merger should have been allowed to go ahead. So it will be interesting to see what happens going forward.
The second developing story is out of Haiti, the FAA issuing a NOTAM to all US airlines suspending service. That was after some gunfire reportedly hitting a Spirit Airlines aircraft, a JetBlue aircraft. Your reaction to those developments?
Yeah, I think a very sensible development on the part of the FAA. I think inevitable that people will want to stand back. I've no doubt that any airline that had been operating in there would have undertaken a comprehensive security assessment to enable them to operate, and given what has happened, that would have a big influence. So whether the FAA did it or the individual airlines, I suspect, would have done it themselves. So not a great surprise, but I think definitely the right measure.
We're taking a global view in this discussion, but there's no denying that the US is still hugely influential in shaping the direction of the industry. As the voice of the global airline industry, or a good chunk of it, what's your message to the new incoming administration in Washington?
Yeah, I think this has to be seen as a positive. I've listened to what the other CEOs have said in relation to that. I think if you look at the administration under Trump first time round, it was very positive. Robert Isom made the comment, and I've heard others say it too, that they stepped in very quickly to secure the future of the industry through the CARES Act. I think the administration here was much clearer and positive about saying, we're going to be behind you. I think a lot of governments around the world didn't know what to do. Many said they would provide support but didn't. So I think that augurs well for the future. I think the other positive is we see a massive move in the direction of greater regulation in Europe in particular. I think we were seeing some of that out of the current administration, which I don't believe was positive, either for consumers or the industry. I think that was driven by generating headlines for people with political ambition. So I think we'll see that change. So I look at it and I can see several positives. Clearly the oil price has responded positively as well. It's fallen. So, you know, I think we have to look at this as a positive opportunity for the industry.
Let me add a little dollop of Scottish cynicism, if I can. Airline executives always tell me they want certainty. Certainty is good for business.
Yeah, but we've never had it.
You've never had it?
Yeah.
But a Trump administration, that's perhaps going to add an additional element of uncertainty, is it not?
Look, you know, our industry, I'm 45 years in the industry now. We've always had uncertainty. We've probably had more geopolitical uncertainty in the past 5 years than I'd witnessed in the previous 40 years. But, you know, our industry is very resilient and we're capable of operating in an environment where you know, we have that uncertainty. Now, maybe investors don't like it as much as we do, but you know, I think we can manage our way through any uncertainty that exists. But if I stand back and look at the direction in which I believe the US will go, I see it as you know, net positive for the industry. Yeah.
It's time to discuss SAF.
Yeah.
You had a spirited discussion with David Neilman of Breeze in Amsterdam a couple of months ago. I'm sure some of our audience will have seen that. It went slightly viral. Yeah. He's very, very proud of his fuel-efficient engines on his A220s. That we all have. You said that he risks going from the cream of the crop to, quote, the cream of the crap.
Yeah.
How do you win over cynics in the industry that do not believe in SAF, that believe that SAF is the right way forward?
To be fair, you don't win. And I don't think we should try and win over everybody. I think having a robust...
You shouldn't even try?
No, you try. Like having a robust... I enjoyed that conversation with David. I've known David for many years. You know, he's... I wouldn't call him a maverick, but he has views that I think make it entertaining to listen to. And you know, we need to have an open and honest discussion about these things. This is, you know, you put the chart up there. This is a huge issue. And the idea that we're just going to all head in the same direction without people challenging and asking questions is a nonsense. So we will have people who are not convinced. We'll have people who are really scared, as they should be when they look at these figures. And we will have people who believe there may be another way. And what I've said is, what we had to do as an industry was to align ourselves with the science and where most governments were going, and to demonstrate that we had a credible technological pathway to net zero in 2050, that we weren't saying, don't worry, we'll get there because some fantastic new technology will come along. So we had to be able to demonstrate that there was a pathway to net zero, and I think we've done that. What I have also said, though, is, you know, it's going to be extremely challenging and extremely expensive.
Case in point, we've got a little screen down here for the benefit of the audience. It looks even more terrifying up there. Let's make sense of this, or try and make sense of this. This is from your IATA Sustainability and Economics team. The estimated cost of net zero 2024 to 2050 is 4.7 trillion. I'm a journalist, I'm not an economics expert, but anything after about 100 billion, it just sort of all becomes the same.
Yeah.
Let's try and quantify that. 174 billion on average every single year between now and 2050. The devil's in the detail, though. 1 billion in 2025, rising to 744 billion every year by 2050. Who is going to be paying for this?
Well, bottom line is, you know, the airlines can't afford to pay that on their own. You know, there's no way. You think about it, and maybe just to try and put it into context, this year we believe the industry fuel bill will be about 291 billion. So if you were to add that 174 billion average, you take it to 465 billion. That would represent about 42% of the cost base of the industry.
Fuel prices are relatively low.
You know, so that 42% of the cost base versus 31% without the cost of SAF. So, you know, you're adding 11 points of cost for an industry that's making a net margin this year of just over 3%. Best years of our industry, we've made just over 5% net margin. So people who have tried to, politicians in particular, who try to sort of make this transition to net zero being at no cost, it's a nonsense. You know, there's no way we can transition in any sense, you know, not just the airline industry to net zero without spending money. Now, the figures for the airline industry are huge because, you know, fuel is our single biggest cost, and the impact of SAF given the small scales that it's being produced in, is going to be big. That would represent, so if we had that 174 billion this year, that would represent about a 17% increase in fares, just to keep everything else as it is. We'd still only make a 3% margin, but fares would have to go up by 17%. That's a huge figure, particularly when you think airline fares have been decreasing. In fact, we're just going to produce a piece of work that's analyzed fare inflation versus CPI inflation for 108 different countries. We'll be producing it soon. But the bottom line is it shows that airline fares, despite all the hype in the media, have not kept pace with inflation. We've taken 2015 and 2019 as baseline. You can look at any years, but we chose those two, 2019 pre-pandemic, and we've looked at fares today. So with very, very, very few examples, I think Iceland is the only one that stood out. Fares have not kept pace with inflation.
So are the days of the low fare numbered?
Well, it's all relative. I think, fuel costs have always influenced fares. I did some work, back of the envelope work, which showed almost a direct correlation between the fuel price and fares. When fuel goes up, prices go up. When fuel goes down, prices come down. It was almost a perfect correlation. So, everybody has to pay the same for fuel, more or less. There's always rumors about some airlines getting it cheaper, but more or less you're paying the same. So, if we've to transition, and if this cost has to be borne by the airline industry alone, fares are going to have to go up. But my message is the airline industry can't do this alone. And there's a number of assumptions behind this. But what we need is, we need other forms of abatement. We can't just sit back and take that the OEMs are just going to produce what they're going to produce. We have to put pressure on them. We have to put pressure on fuel companies.
So, who's not pulling their weight? Who should shoulder more responsibility? Everyone but the airlines.
Yeah, everybody else. It's assumed by everybody. And I get a bit frustrated and annoyed, and I've challenged them as well. Everybody says we're committed to net zero in 2050, but they're committed to it so long as the airlines pay the bill. So I've listened to the OEMs, the fuel companies, the airports, the GDSs, the ANSPs, all committed to net zero in 2050. But it's on the basis that airlines will bear the cost. That's not going to happen because the value chain cannot stand back and say, we expect airlines to do all the work and we'll take all the credit. So there's going to have to be an acknowledgement and recognition that this will only be achieved.
And when's that reckoning going to come? Because
well, it's coming now because I think, this has helped to demonstrate that anybody who thinks that airlines can pay it, that somehow we can bear the cost of it, that's not going to be possible. The impact of the 17% increase in fares is going to be very, very significant if that were the case. So, what I would say, and I've got a fantastic economics team who've developed this model, but the one thing I can say for sure is it's going to be wrong. But I think it demonstrates, based on all the knowledge we have today, based on everything we understand around the development of SAF, and based on where we think the fuel price will go, this is going to be a massive transition.
We could speak about SAF all evening, Willie, but I want to move on to a couple of other subjects. Lufthansa Group CEO Carsten Spohr, an IATA member, he suggested last month that all flights entering Europe should be required to avoid Russian airspace in the spirit of fair competition. I know you disagree with that.
I do,
but
yeah.
Tell us why.
Well, my view is that Russian airspace should be open to everybody. I don't believe there's any safety or security risk associated with transiting through Russian airspace. And it should be for each airline to decide whether they want to, based on their risk assessment, fly through Russian airspace. We have a lot of airlines who are flying through Russian airspace. There have been no incidents involving those aircraft. So I think the idea that we close down airspace to everybody is not the right way forward. I think we should be trying to move, because this is a political issue. It's not a safety or security issue. It's politics. We should be moving to get Russian airspace open.
But it's the Russians that are banning the Western airlines. If you're an airline, you were still running BA, you could fly through.
Yeah, but my view is at some stage we're going to hope that the war in Ukraine finishes and we will be returning to some sense of normality, and we will want Russian airspace to be open to everybody. The other thing I would say is, given the pressure on airspace in other parts of the world, it's good that we have some airlines taking the pressure off and flying through Russian airspace, because if they all had to reroute over the limited airspace that's available between Europe and Asia, It would put even significantly greater pressure there where there are problems today. So we don't have the capacity available for all aircraft, all that are flying today to avoid Russian airspace.
What would you say to someone that suggests that IATA has members in China, and that's a bit of a fudge answer from an organization that needs to keep a lot of different people happy?
Well, my job is to fudge.
Irish fudge.
No. But to be honest with you, this is a principled position. I would be arguing the same. If I was sitting here as the CEO of British Airways, I would be arguing the same point. I would want to be able to fly through Russian airspace. And this idea of a level playing field, there isn't a level playing field. There never has been a level playing field. The playing field is like any. Well, okay, you guys have fantastic AstroTurf. I play on grass, and there's holes in parts of the pitch. It's never been fully level. And we recognize that. There are advantages and disadvantages depending on which part of the world you're in. And the idea that we will ever have a completely level playing field is just not going to happen. So, there are things that I like and there are things that I don't like. When I was a CEO, there were aspects of my business that annoyed me because when I could see what some of my competitors were doing.
What annoyed you?
Michael O'Leary. But you just have to get on with it. You just have to get on with it and operate as best you possibly can with the cards that are dealt for you.
Ryanair ever join IATA?
No. And I'm a great fan of Michael, and I like him, and we meet from time to time, and we can have a chat. But I've never felt that I should reach out to him to try and convince him to join IATA, even though I know I could make a case. But Michael's great. If he ever wanted to join, he'd be welcome to join.
It's not like an exclusive nightclub where your name's not down, you're not getting in. No. Everyone's welcome.
No, absolutely. I was in what was then called the Association of European Airlines when Ryanair applied to join. And I was the only CEO at the table who voted in favour of them joining. Everybody else did not want them in the club, and I thought that was wrong. And actually, it led ultimately to the demise of the Association of European Airlines and the creation of Airlines for Europe, which has Ryanair as one of the founding members, one of the 5 founding members of that association alongside IAG. So, Michael has a lot to contribute. We agree on a lot of things. We disagree on some. He has a unique style that I think is fantastic, that it's unique
to him. Keeps us busy.
Yeah. And it's good that we often say the same things, but we use slightly different language.
Yes.
And I think it's healthy for the industry that we have people like him around.
Loads of questions coming in. I want to come through a couple of other topics first. CrowdStrike, that was a big mess earlier in the summer. You wrote on your blog on the IATA website, the onus must be on tech companies for reliability. Yeah. Scale is not an excuse. We've got some tech executives from the airline and aviation sectors here. Yeah. What's your message to them?
Well, I think other industries can learn a lot from the airline industry. We are safe, we're safe because we work very hard at it. We work very hard. We don't take anything for granted.
So is that saying tech companies aren't working hard enough, aren't taking things for granted?
Well, they clearly weren't because of the problems that we have, or that we had, and we're all heavily dependent on IT, and we want to make sure that, it is as robust as it can ever possibly be. And there will be mistakes. But when there are mistakes, that we're open and honest about the mistakes, and we work hard to ensure that others learn from those mistakes. And that's the great thing about the airline industry. We share our failings, as painful as they are, because we don't want anybody else in the industry to have to suffer some of the things that happen to us. And that makes us better, it makes us safer, it makes us more robust. And I think other industries could learn from that.
Are you ready for a quick fire round?
Sure.
Yeah. In 2023, you said Amsterdam Schiphol Airport was the worst in the world. Yeah. Who has it in 2024?
Amsterdam's pretty bad still, but I'd say, my old home, Dublin Airport, have come into a crazy situation. They have a cap on passenger numbers based on road transport access to the airport that was established in 2007. The road transport problem doesn't exist today, and they've spent hundreds of millions to build a second runway. You now have a 2-runway Dublin Airport that is capped because of a planning restriction in 2007 about how many cars are driving on. It's just madness.
All right.
And the airport should have done something about that years ago.
Are all of your worst airports in Europe?
Yeah.
All right. Credit where it's due. Yeah. Where's your favorite airport to fly through, big or large?
I have to say I like Dallas. I like Sean. I thought he gave a great presentation. And interestingly, he talked about 50 years ago. I looked at the figures. In 50 years ago, RPKs or revenue passenger miles were exactly the same as the industry for February of this year. So February of this year we flew the same number of RPKs as we flew in the year 1974. So the industry is over 12 times the size that it was in 1974.
I promised a quick fire round, some really quick ones here. Are you a window or an aisle seat?
Aisle.
Why?
I just like the extra room.
Extra room, there we go. A top tip for beating jet lag?
Oh, red wine.
Your all-time favorite airline livery?
Strangely enough, probably British Airways livery.
The Chatham Dockyard?
Yeah, which came about, as you know, by mistake. It was designed for Concorde. And Bob Ayling, who was the CEO of BA, came up with I forget what it was called, but these fantastic, very colourful liveries from all over the world. And looked great until Margaret Thatcher, the then Prime Minister, took out borrowed a handkerchief and put it over the tail and said it was disgusting. And Bob lost his job over that. But what people didn't realise is he was colourblind. So what he was saying and what everybody else was saying was completely different. But I think the BA livery is pretty special.
Do you think they'll ever change it, tweak it?
I'm sure they will, and it has been tweaked slightly. But but I think it's very neat.
Do you think we'll see a return to supersonic passenger travel in our lifetimes?
I don't think so. I think the restrictions on supersonic travel were so bad that Concorde never made money. The only time BA made money with Concorde, and it was grounded in just almost exactly a year before I joined. I would have grounded it had the decision been left to me, because the only time it was profitable was when they announced that they were going to ground the aircraft. Then people wanted to fly in it. Before that, it never made any money.
Without dredging ancient history, Branson said he wanted to buy Concorde when BA and Air France said they were getting rid of it. Would you have let Branson have it?
Oh, yeah. He always says those things afterwards, never at the time. So, yeah. It would have put that competitor out of business.
Will Comac ever become a genuine competitor to Airbus and Boeing?
Yeah, it will. I've watched Comac for years. They've got great ambition. The 919, I'm watching carefully its operation in commercial service. But they'll get there, without question.
Two quickies before we get on to the Q&A from the audience. You go back to BA for one day, what would you change?
No, I wouldn't go back.
Single pilot cockpits, good idea or bad idea?
No, I don't think it'll happen. For me, you go from 2 pilots to no pilots, but I think I don't see the logic in transitioning from 2 to 1 to none. It makes no sense.
I'm enjoying these quick fire answers, Willie. Let's keep that momentum up with our Q&A from the audience. Some really good ones come in. In IATA's view, would it be good or bad if the United States were to privatize its air traffic control?
Air traffic control is private in the UK, so it doesn't. Yeah, NATS. So it doesn't necessarily make it better. You'd like to think it does, but I think you can have very good publicly owned utilities and very poor privately owned utilities. So I don't think that's the answer.
Keeping with ATC, earlier today, Robin Hayes was asked if anywhere in the world is getting it right. His answer was apparently inconclusive, according to this anonymous question. Any insight as to where in the world is doing anything?
Not really.
I
think it needs to be reformed. We're still operating in an environment that was dictated by things back in the 40s, and that's the technology has changed. So I think you'd have to start again, and it would make a huge difference. In Europe, we reckon 10% reduction in fuel burn, 10% reduction in CO2, massive reduction. And when you look at the cost, the impact that would have on the cost projection for the industry. That's why these things have to be done.
This is a great one. If whoever submitted this question, shake my hand later with a glass of red wine, if you wanted a glass of red wine as well. Long term, if jet fuel prices rose, would it be a blessing in disguise for lowering the opportunity cost to adopt SAF?
Yeah, it would, because what we're looking at is the incremental cost between the price of jet and the price of SAF.
Sure.
So that's where that additional cost comes from. If you have higher jet, well, then obviously the incremental cost is lower.
If there was one tax or regulation you could wave your magic wand and make disappear, what would it be?
Tax.
Just tax. And lastly, from the audience Q&A, do you think President-elect Trump will be able to get the Russian airspace issue solved?
I think in time, yes. Yeah.
Okay. I've got one final one, very selfishly. You started your aviation career back in 1979, famously as a pilot. What was the most valuable lesson that you picked up on that journey that you still have with you today?
Yeah, I think because I trained as a pilot, the one thing, and I've said this consistently over the years, that it's helped me to do is to make decisions, and make decisions quickly, and make tough decisions that have to be made. Because when you're in the air and something goes wrong, you have to decide what to do. So you take very quickly, you've got to take in all of the information, look at all of the options. But you don't have the option to say, well, let's think about this and come back tomorrow. So decision making and being comfortable with the decisions you make and moving on. And the great thing about it that we teach all the time when we're flying, if it wasn't the right decision, change it. Don't be afraid to change your decision. So you're always looking at the right outcome and ensuring that you're taking decisions to get to that outcome. So I think being comfortable making tough and sometimes extremely tough decisions has come easy to me.
Willie Walsh, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.